Okay, everybody. My name is Nicole Bahina, and we are so excited that you have joined us today for our mini training on getting ready for housing development. We're going to be going over the process and the partnerships to help make the development process go smoothly for you and to help you assess whether you are ready and your agency is ready to involved in this process. And I go over a few things here so that you know a little bit about who we are. Steve and I work at an agency called CSH, and we really have a mission to help improve the lives of vulnerable people, maximize public resources, and build healthy, strong communities in a way that uses housing called supportive housing. And we'll talk more today about what that means. So you'll be hearing a lot from me. As I mentioned, my name is Nicole Bahina. I work in our training center, and I'm also joined by my colleague, Steve Kwasny, who's our senior loan officer in the Eastern region. He'll be talking a lot about the ins and outs of the development process. Also joined by a few people from the Housing Finance Corporation. So we have Bill, Rob, and Elaine, and so we'll be hearing from them today as well. They'll be behind the scenes answering questions sometimes, but we'll also get to hear their voices occasionally as we go throughout today. Objectives of the session are to provide information and guidance to help you think about whether you should consider and undergo the development and operations of sustainable permanent rental housing or supportive housing. And then we're also going to be providing a very high-level overview of the Homeless Housing Assistance Loan Demonstration program, and we'll hear more about that from Bill in a little bit. Just an outline for today. So we're going to talk about the program overview and the application process, and then we're going to dive into why housing is a platform for helping people get better and why services are an important component of that. We'll go through the typical development cycle process so that you understand all of the steps and what you're kind of getting into. And then we'll talk about partner roles and how it's important that you don't go in this alone. And you'll have support provided to you through technical assistance and things like that, but we want to make sure you really know about the partner roles. But we'll save time for questions at the end. We'll also take questions throughout, and we'll show you some resources that we have. So of housekeeping items, we have everybody muted just to reduce background noise. We're expecting about up to 80 people to join, and so we are going to be taking questions through that box. And so everybody should make sure that their chat box is turned on, ready to go. You do that by clicking on the chat in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. And then I've been chatting to you. I think a couple of people said, hi, can I hear you? I don't really hear anything. So if you're having audio trouble, you could do two things, and they're shown on the screen here. One is you can log off and restart the event. Sometimes that's easiest. Or you can send a chat to the host, and I will do my best to troubleshoot with you. So if you do have a question, you can go ahead and put it in that chat box and send it to all panelists. I want everybody to open the chat box right now. And in the chat, there's a place where it says send to, and it gives you some options. And we want you to select all panelists so that when you send a question, Bill and Eileen and Rob and Steve and myself all get the question so that we can triage it as best as possible. So we'll remind periodically to submit questions as we go throughout. Housekeeping item is that you will need to grab a pen and a piece of paper. We're going to be doing some self-assessment throughout the session today, and so I want to make sure that everybody has a pen and a piece of paper so that you can take notes and kind of fill out those self-assessment pieces. And the presentation today will be giving you access to the recording so you can send it on to people, or if you missed part of it, we'll make sure you have access to that, as well as the slides in the material that you'll be seeing today. And that, I want to invite Bill to unmute yourself and go ahead and talk to us a little bit about the program.
Paul, and good afternoon, everyone. As Nicole had said, with this webinar's objectives, the main focus is kind of a more general overview and information related to how to plan for and consider the feasibility of and fund, operate permanent housing, including supportive housing for homeless individuals and persons with special needs. And part of the reason that we've done this at this time, not only to kind of provide information for for all interested parties, but we also in kind of timely to assist agencies that may be interested or nonprofits that may be interested to apply for our homeless housing assistance loan demonstration. And so many of the attendees most likely know about this, but just in case there are some attendees that don't, I wanted to kind of go over the key points of the demonstration funding opportunity. The home housing assistance loan will be a forgivable loan for permanent rental or supportive housing, and it will provide funding, forgivable loan funding for up to 10 units. The focus of this funding is to and operate housing stock for homeless individuals and households in the small communities and rural counties, and kind of our threshold is counties with populations up to 250,000. The key objectives, of course, as I said, is develop rental housing stock, much needed rental housing stock for homeless households in these areas, and so to help build the capacity of local nonprofits to be, developer of and owner and operator of these this housing for this population. And again, our focus or our wish would be is to kind of receive and select applicants who would be interested in doing this, again, to build their capacity, not to just do it kind of once and done, but also think of doing it in the future, because this is a demonstration. This particular kind of policy or strategy is to just be a regular annual kind of funding resource, again, for homeless housing in rural areas and counties. For this particular opportunity, the total funding will be a little more than $5 million. The maximum funding for development at this time, because we're still in the required application development phase, but we think it will stay at this. It will be $600,000 up to 4 units and $750,000 for development with 5 to 10 units. You apply to develop new construction or acquire and rehab a property. Some of the types of housing that you can develop under this funding opportunity would be everything from one single family unit up to 10 units that are in a single site. You also have up to 10 units spread across 3 scattered development sites. We're trying to be fairly flexible, but also kind of keep it in a range where the target applicants can reasonably and feasibly be able to kind of develop this housing as well as kind of help build their capacity. Eligible applicants will be nonprofits, and one of the special things of this demonstration is that each elected applicant will be assigned a technical advisor provided by Florida Finance Corporation, and that's really to assist with creating a comprehensive development plan and provide support through the entire pre-development and development process. That technical advisor, we will contract with entities to provide that service, but that technical advisor also will then have the sources of Housing Finance Corporation's policy staff, multifamily development staff, and asset management staff, as well as credit underwriting services, again, to kind of help you. The applicant will be doing the work, the focus to build capacity and kind of have a successful experience in the development is help the selected applicants kind of walk through and go this process so they learn how to do this in the future. Next slide, Nicole, please. Important dates. These dates are still tentative, but what we're looking at, as we kind of have published earlier this summer, we're looking to issue the request for applications, or RFA, for the Housing Assistance Loan Demonstration sometime around August 17th. We will have a application submission deadline of around September 23rd. So that will be, once the RFA is issued, that will give the applicant around 6 weeks to complete the application. If you haven't seen the application or been following the process, this is a little different than many of our other requests for applications, because you won't have to provide as much information at application submission or deadline, because you may not have site control. You're kind of helping you walk through some of these processes. So there won't be as many things that you'll have to have at application submission for that RFA like you would with others. We would suggest, if you're interested, go to our website, and we put the link here to review the draft RFA and other relevant information that is posted on the same page where this Homeless Housing Assistance Loan Demonstration RFA is housed. Our goal is to, although we are pretty well set on kind of the basic terms and the structure of the RFA, we'll still be tweaking some things based on comments that we received at our last workshop, as well as some of the work we've been doing since that time. So we look at, we will be issuing another draft RFA, kind of an updated draft RFA, within the next week or so. And as always, if you have any RFA questions or comments, send them to Ken Reese. See his email address here. He is our Director of Multifamily Programs, and then he and his staff will either they will post them as well as respond to them, or pull in policy and other staff to help respond to your questions and comments. As we get closer to issuing the RFA, if you have any recommendations or comments, again, as we kind of regularly say, the closer you get to the issue date, the less we're going to be able to consider. And this is a demonstration not only really to build capacity, it's going to be helpful with Florida Housing to develop how to best develop housing stock in these areas, and also how to best help nonprofits build capacity to develop the housing stock. Just quickly, I think another important reason for this webinar today is that there's some other special needs housing or homeless housing RFAs in development in the pipeline right now. One that we are tentatively going to issue probably mid-November, and that's to financing to develop permanent supportive housing for persons with special needs. If you're not aware how we define persons with special needs, and kind of in kind of our statute and our rule, is that persons with special needs can include persons with a disabling condition, survivors of domestic violence, and youth aging out of foster care. And as you all, many of you know better than I do, that includes certain subpopulations. For example, veterans with disabilities, chronic homeless individuals. Some of those, so if they kind of fit under those one or more of those key categories, we're going to be looking at issuing this RFA, providing about $6 million in loans. This will be a loan, not a forgivable loan. I believe it'll be 0% interest loan. Applicant also must be a nonprofit and want to develop between 10 to 30 of the permanent supportive housing units. And again, we will be starting to the development, the public development process of that RFA in the near future. Now to the slide that is up on screen, and we're not going to really spend any time on it. I just wanted to think about it as we go through this presentation, because these terms and processes are kind of pretty general in, say, a rental housing development kind of process or phases. But I just wanted to specifically say that if you haven't been through the Florida Housing Finance Corporation, come in through and were selected for funding, it may be different than maybe other sources that you have used to access for funding for housing development. So for housing, we really have phases. As you said, we have pre-development, site control, and ability to proceed. And what that is really to kind of help prepare and develop your development plan and pre-development, address any pre-development activity that you have to do related to site control, ability to proceed. So really, you're kind of putting your plan together and getting all your ducks in order during this process. Again, if you're coming in for the homeless housing assistance loan, you will be, if you're elected as an awardee, you will enter into this process. Everybody will enter into this pre-development process, and that's where you will be assisted in developing your development plan, helping site control if you need, and then the ability to proceed. And then the credit underwriting and financial approval is really where, in very general terms, is where all the information that you have provided in your application, all the information that is needed to say this is going to be a feasible and viable financial deal, that you have all your zoning and local government documents done, that's going to be verified and approved in the credit underwriting and financing approval. That's where your budgets, total development costs will be kind of reviewed and verified, and that really moves you into your closing on your financing, your permanent financing. After that happens and construction begins, or you're doing the rehab, doing your rehab, we will require a number of inspections to be able to get your financing draw approvals, and then finally, after it's up and operating, well, depending on what the RFA are, the loan commitments, we will be, and you will be participating based on our requirements in various asset management and compliance activities that you require. So this may seem overwhelming, and it should definitely be taken seriously, but we wanted you to just kind of get an idea of what this is about, so you can kind of consider some of these things when you're thinking about developing this type of housing. Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you. We're going to start by making sure everybody's on the same page when we talk about some of the key definitions and terms that we're going to hear throughout the development process. It's always good to make sure that we know what type of housing we're talking about. And so I'm going to go through this section. And if you're making notes or following along when we send out the slide deck later, this section starts on slide 15, and and so you can follow along or make a note there. So as Bill mentioned before, the RFA, as it's released, talk about permanent rental housing. And so we want to make sure that we define that. And it's defined as affordable rental housing that is leased for continued occupancy as long as the tenant is compliant with the requirements of the lease. So just like in me, there's requirements built into the lease that they must comply with in order to maintain their housing. And the lease for permanent rental housing should be for a minimum of 7 months, but no limits on the length of tenancy. So it can't be less than 7 months, but it doesn't also say after 1 year you need to move on or move out. And at CSH, we typically work with communities to develop a very specific type of permanent rental housing called supportive housing. And so you'll see us today, or you might hear us today talk about what is supportive housing. And just know that most of the, actually all of the key concepts we're going to talk about today that relate to supportive housing are all applicable to this permanent rental housing definition that's released in RFA. And so just so you know, if you hear those terms, you can consider them synonymous for the purposes of today's presentation and the RFA. So supportive housing really combines affordable housing with services. So those are the two key components that we're going to talk a lot about today. So we have the housing piece and the services that are combined to help people who have complex challenges live with stability, autonomy, and dignity. And the types of populations that you're going to be serving under the RFA are going to vary. Some of you may be serving very vulnerable people who've been homeless for a very long period of time, and some of you might be serving people who have shorter term needs. And that's okay. Just know that when talking about the permanent rental housing and supportive housing, we're talking about both components. There's an affordability and a housing piece, and then there's also a services piece. You'll hear us also talk today about these essential components, housing and services, how they must be distinct and separate from one another, meaning the person who's providing services probably shouldn't be the person who's also managing the property. And so that those should be distinct and separate, either have separate agencies do them or have separate departments within your agency. And then because of that, you'll also hear us talking a lot today about the collaborative nature that is required for permanent rental housing and supportive housing. It is an essential component for what makes this type of housing work. Let's talk about housing for a second. So as we mentioned before, this program is not a transitional program. The housing is permanent. It's not time limited. And when we talk about supportive housing, it's also affordable. And so there's typically a rental subsidy, or the agency will find some kind of funding source to make up the difference between what a tenant can contribute and the cost of the actual housing. I also want to make sure that the housing is as independent as possible. So that's why there's a requirement that the tenant holds the lease and that lease has normal responsibilities, just like you and I have if we were to lease in a unit or an apartment. When you talk about housing, there's typically 3 types of housing that we talk about. And so in a lot of CSH's resources, which we'll point you to, you can see very clearly in there that we talk about single-site apartment buildings that are used exclusively and primarily for housing people in supportive housing. There's also a scattered site where rent subsidies or apartments are leased in the open market, and so you may have one unit and then have another unit across town, and they may be part of the same program but not physically located together. And then you may have integrated situations where apartment buildings have a lot of units that are market rate and just kind of open to the public, along with some affordable housing, along with some supportive housing or affordable housing that has services attached to it. And types of housing that you'll hear us talk about. As I mentioned before, one of the highlights of this type of housing is that there has to be property and housing management staff that is working separate from yet coordinating effectively with supportive services providers. And this together equals the ability of tenants to sustain their stable housing. So we're going to give you a link to a document called Not a Solo Act, and it's a little bit of an older document of CSH's, but it's still very relevant, and so we'll make sure you have this. But essentially it walks through the different disciplines and partnerships that you need to create to make permanent rental housing and this type of supportive housing work well. So we're going to have developers and people who know development really well working together with supportive service agencies, also working with property management. And so your agency may play a lot of these roles. You may play one of these roles and then partner with others. But the key is that it's a variety of people and partners that need to come together to make the project successful. One of the other key components of housing location is that it's integrated into the community. And so they may look very different depending on what your community looks like. But ideally, we want you to be seeking out units and sites that are located within safe neighborhoods, near existing entities like you and I would want to be close to. And if you're not able to do this because you might be in a more rural community, then you just need to think about how do we help tenants integrate into the community? Do we need to build in transportation? Do we need to partner with other service providers that can provide this service? And so there's lots of ways that you can do that. We talked about housing. And now I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about services. And services are really the other key component that helps make this type of housing successful. And we'll talk about why services should be flexible, voluntary, and independent. That affordable housing with the services is really the platform together that helps someone recover, helps them become healthy, helps them live an integrated life in the community and develop personally. And when we're thinking about designing our tenant-centered service plan, we need to know who we're serving and what do they need. And then we also should be interviewing and talking to those prospective tenants about what they need. And so there's various ways to do this in that Not a Solo Act guide, and some of the other resources can walk you through how to do this. I think this will be news to you. A lot of you are probably service providers yourselves, but some of the key services that at CSH we've seen are sort of the proven ones that help people recover, help people get healthy, help people move on to live stable lives. So we have health and mental health services, child care, which allows people to focus on either making appointments or making it to job interviews or things like that. Integrating into the community and independent living skills are also things that can be provided in supportive housing and permanent rental housing. We have employment services and support, substance recovery and support, and budgeting and financial management and support. And it's important to note that these services can be provided directly by your agency. There may be a case manager on hand that can do a lot of this work for you. Oftentimes, it's more sustainable and more affordable if the agency partners with community-based services that are already existing in the community to provide these services. So don't think that you have to provide every single one of these services, but just know that these services should be available and be provided. That just may mean that you need to enter into memorandums of understanding or partnerships with entities that can provide these services. So a couple more key components of the service aspect, and that is that services should really be voluntary. And what we mean by that is that being able to maintain someone's housing is not required that they have to participate in services in order to maintain their housing. And so that may be a new concept for some of you, but it's really something that has been shown to be a best practice. And we like to see that services are voluntary for tenants, but not the staff. And so the onus is on the staff to develop relationships, to assertively and actively engage tenants in trying to participate in services, and then making sure that the services we're providing are ones that are user-friendly, that are at the right times, that make sense for tenants, and that will help them meet individual goals. service strategy is part of an overall housing first strategy, and some of you probably have heard about housing first. It's kind of a buzzword these days. Everyone at the federal level has embraced it as a best practice, and we know that your application also needs to be demonstrating that you're going to comply with the housing first and supportive housing, a housing first model within supportive housing and permanent rental housing. What does this mean? Well, it means that we house tenants without preconditions. We work really hard to keep them housed, and we form these effective service relationships to help keep you housed. And so this means that as service providers, we need to be focusing on crisis intervention, intervening when there's a crisis so that we can help avoid someone being kicked out of their housing. We need to focus on placing people into permanent housing as quickly as possible, and then providing the case management and wraparound services necessary to help keep people housed. So there's 7 key principles of housing first, and I'm going to leave you guys with this slide. You can refer back to it, and there are also a lot of other materials that we can provide for you on housing first, but just know that these key principles really talk about what we just said: getting people housed quickly, providing services to them, and making sure that we have a harm reduction approach. And for people who want to make a note, the 7 key principles of housing first are going to be on slide 31, so you can go ahead and make a note about that. The other principles within housing first is the idea that we're serving people in a way that meets a harm reduction philosophy. And this is a philosophy that really recognizes the resilience of individuals. It expands the therapeutic conversation and allows providers like you to intervene and house people who may be actively using drugs or may not have all their issues sort of worked out before we get them housed. Right? If we required everybody to fix all their issues before we housed them, then we wouldn't even be serving the people who really need our assistance. And so we could do a whole day training on harm reduction, which we don't have time for today. But I do just want to point out that a lot of times there's this misconception that harm reduction means people show up and just do whatever they want in housing. And that's not necessarily the case. And so we've taken this from the Midwest Harm Reduction Institute on slide 33, that harm reduction is not either for or against drug use. So we're not actively promoting drug use as being okay, but we're also not going to kick people out for using. Not a consent dues. It's not don't ask, don't tell, or anything goes. It really requires case managers to understand that they establish a relationship with a client, help them work to overcome their barriers, but also understand that we're meeting the clients where they're at, and not everybody's going to show up sober, ready to get a job, and sort of, ready to do all of the things that we think they need to do. And with that, I don't see any questions coming in, so I just want to put in a reminder to people that if you have questions, go ahead and chat them in the chat box, and we will make sure to try to answer those as we go. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Steve, who's going to dive in a little bit about some of the concepts of development and what that means.
Again, this is Steve Kwasny. I'm a senior lender for CSH. I cover the eastern region, and that includes Florida. And what we do is we provide technical assistance like we're doing here today, as well as funding for acquisition and pre-development of permanent sort of housing projects. So in 15 minutes, we're going to spend providing an overview of some of the concepts within the development cycle, providing a framework for supportive housing development, introducing you to some new terminology, and help you make the decision to develop this type of housing product. So, are you ready to be a developer? You want to ask yourself some questions. So, do you have a clear vision of what it is that you want to do? And particularly here, it's about do you have buy-in at the board level for your organization and management and the rest of the team? Do you understand the population that you're trying to serve? So is this the right time to be doing this type of a project for this type of population? You need to have an appreciation for the development cycle. This could take several months or in some cases much longer. So you need to be thinking of the capacity of your organization, do your daily work as well as this project, and think about what impact this might have on my organization from a financial perspective. And then as Nicole mentioned, and we will continue to mention throughout the rest of the afternoon here, it's a teamwork, so the development team. What do you have, what knowledge do you have internally, and what do you need to bring on board? Supportive housing development is a process, and it's important that we recognize that from the outset. So while most of us on today's call are going to be focused on developing projects of no more than 10 units, the reality is whether you're working a project that's 3 or 300 units, number one, no two projects are ever going to be exactly the same, but many similarities in the process. So task-oriented. So you build on the successful completion of prior tasks. Your timing is always going to be critical relative to each and every task. You do have periodic chances to revise and repeat tasks based on information that you learn throughout the project. As Paul mentioned, there's many players involved in this project, so some are going to be new to you, but all are going to be critical to the success of your project. From the outset, it's also okay to be confused. You're going to be exposed to new terms, new concepts. What you need to do is you need to be prepared, and remember, you're not the first to go through this. It is a learning process, and like education, you got the opportunity to learn from others' experience. Ask questions, and don't be afraid to phone a friend. So this slide is really the who, what, why, where, and when of development. So as we said, most of you are very familiar with the services piece, but the other 4 elements are equally important in development. And your success is going to result from the coordination amongst those elements, the communication between all of those elements, really the collaboration with all of those partners. So think of developer game. You're going to see this slide several times throughout the next 10 minutes, but it's kind of like a combination of the game life and Monopoly. Sometimes you're going to feel like you own Park Place. You're going to have to go back several spaces. You will not pass go. You will not get to collect your $200. Our goal here is to be able to open a building that's going to serve our target population and our community and also be sustained for the long term. So let's look through the 5 phases of development, beginning with the concept phase. So the elements in the concept phase, your vision, and the decisions you're going to make at the outset within that vision about development, how you're going to build the project, how you're going to operate that in the long run. And again, we will stress this, and it's important for you to be thinking about this throughout development project, is the capacity. Again, what impact is this project going to have on your organization? Vision thing, it gets back, this is going to be the foundation for our project. It's extremely critical. This will define your organization, but for your community and for your partners, the direction that you're heading. So this is the blueprint that's going to influence this throughout the development and operations process and hopefully help you avoid challenges. Financing side, this is where we start to identify the sources of funding for our project. So we're planning for building the project today, but also how we're going to operate for the next 30 years. So these 3 sources, capital, operating, and services, we'll dig into these a little bit later. They get the capacity piece. So think about what the project's going to have, organization's ability to handle day-to-day operations in addition to wherever else might be required, bringing your project from concept to actually being open for operations. And it's assembling a development team. So think about who's going to lead your project, what skills you have in-house, and what partners do we want or need to bring on. forward to a successful project. So, we have, hang on 1 second. So let me skip to the next slide here. We've worked through the concept, talking about how we're going to build this project. That's talking about the feasibility, and this is where some of our directional choices are going to begin. Whether or not we decide to carry on and move forward throughout the process, or if we've learned some things during this first and second stage that we need to make some changes and go back and revise our concept. So questions you need to be asking at this point. Will my project work, number one? And then secondly, how will my project work? The questions you should be asking yourselves during this phase is, again, we've talked about capacity, so hopefully that's not lost on anyone. But is timing right for this project and for your organization? Should we partner? And if so, whom should we partner? And project take advantage of an opportunity? Do we have an existing building or a parcel of land or maybe an option to do this? So when we talk about feasibility, we really break it down into two primary buckets. So physical side, which is the land or the bricks and mortar, the structure of our building. And then number two, show me the money. So it's the financial side. So not only how are we going to build this, but how to operate this project for the long run. Side, again, this is about the building or the site. So where are we going to? Nicole talked a little bit about what we have to see from a location perspective, but what's needed to make our vision a reality? Does it meet that need of the community? Zoning changes required. What impact will the location have on how we deliver services? Are others ready? So this is, whether or not do we own the land today or can we quickly acquire that? Then the design aspect of it. How will it service the population that we're intending to service here? Are there any special requirements due to the population or the location? Keep in mind all of these four factors here are all going to have a potential impact on the feasibility of the project. A quick minute here taking a look at this. So when we talk about project financing, we envision a three-legged stool. Your project's going to have a budget for each of these aspects. There are sources and uses for each of them. Any source comes with its own timelines, regulations, and demands. So the capital side is really about development. How do we build our project, get it from our vision to actually being ready to operate? The operations or operating side is how do we keep our project open and operating successfully for many years? And the services piece is this is really the S in supportive housing. So how are we going to pay for this? With that in mind, financial feasibility has three budgets. So spend some extra time here, and we're here today because of the Florida Housing Finance demonstration, and you really need to be able to explain your vision and your project to your funders, in this case, particularly Florida Housing. So number one, how is our project going to work? So for today, to get it built, for the next 30 years. So from a capital or development perspective, how are we paying for the build of this? What are the sources of funding? When we talk about that source or where we're getting those funds from, and the uses are what are we going to spend the money on? So hard costs associated with development, the acquisition of the property, labor, material, soft costs. This could be legal fees, reserves, accounting fees. The operations leg of the stool. How are we going to cover the cost of running this building? This is our income statement. So rental revenues are going to make up a portion of where we're getting some of those fundings, but we may need some additional subsidies to make this project work. And the expense side of it, it's the utilities, it's the maintenance, it's real estate taxes and everything to keep the lights on and the building running successfully. And lastly, and very importantly, is the supportive services budget. So how are we going to pay for the critical services to help our target population thrive. Where's this funding going to come from? It may come from the COC, local subsidies, and certainly how long are these things going to continue? You know, we may need to purchase this building and carry the building to closing. So we talked a little bit about pre-development funding. Are you going to need this? And as we said, Florida Housing has their pre-development loan program. CSH is also involved from a technical assistance and funding perspective. How are we going to pay for this while we're getting all of our project financing? How are we going to pay for making the architect's plans a reality? You know, if this is new construction, if it's renovation, there's a cost associated with that. You know, on the permanent financing side, some of these funds, you know, what are the requirements of those? Are we going to require payments? What type of reporting will our funding sources demand for this particular project? So let's take a look on the next slide here. We have a sample project. Now, these are based on some actual projects with some numbers that may or may not actually apply to your project. But you'll see that we've got three legs of the stool, the capital side, and for purposes of this, we're using the state demonstration here. But so $750,000 is coming from there, and if it's a nice round dollar project, you may get something from another source. Here we've listed the Federal Home Loan Bank. Now, in the operating leg, this is where these are your revenues. So this is a portion of this. In this case, we've got maybe coming from the COC for $80,000 of your annual rent. So that's making up more than 60% of the rent of the cash flow here. And then the most would be coming from our collection. And then lastly, on the services side, you see in this instance, we've got three different sources of funding, and these are annual sources, so local grants, private donations, maybe funding from the CSC as well to bring on an employment coordinator or peer support specialist or something like that. So of a project with a nice round number of $1 million. So in the projects, especially as they get larger, there could be some very complex financing needs, and some things you should take into consideration with your project is design decisions that you make as you're thinking about what this building is going to look like may impact both the capital and the operating leg of the stool. Specialized design or accessibility or security systems, those things can have an impact on the cost of the project. Populations you serve, necessary services may, for a particular population, may require an increased amount of services funding. Depending again on your building structure, if it's an older, less efficient building, it costs a little bit more for maintenance, for utilities. In the case if you probably not so much for this type of a building, but you need security on your building as well. That's an additional cost that we need to take into consideration. And timelines. Again, we talked about the importance of being aware of those timelines for the various sources of funds, operating funds, and services funding. So to make sure you're aware of all of the sources, aware of the timelines, and that you're taking time to coordinate those. More from the financial feasibility aspect, some additional items to keep in mind. With the population we're intending to service with this particular demonstration, tenant income is going to be relatively low. We may need some operating subsidies to make the project work. Cash flow, it's often going to be very tight, partially because of the rents, but just because of the nature of these projects and the size of these projects. So they can't really afford much debt that requires a traditional repayment on there. Another thing to keep in mind as you're putting together your capital budget here is these are your rainy day funds for any unforeseen increase in expenses, unplanned vacancies, or delays in other funding. So, site selection and design can have an impact on your costs. So there could be regulatory factors. Can we operate the existing building that we have here? Zoning changes that might add some additional time here. competition standpoint, we want to make sure that our project's going to be competitive and be able to attract tenants and maintain our occupancy levels to cover all of our costs. And the cost standpoint, we really need to determine in phase how much it will cost not only to build the project, but also to operate our project. So members of the team that we put together can assist us. So congratulations, everyone. We've just completed phase 2, and what we walk away from this phase with are budgets that are going to work. We think the project is positioned to compete well. We've identified our funding sources, and we've also identified those partners and with whom we're going to head the finish line. So now it's on phase 3 of the development cycle. So this is deal making. This is where we make our vision a reality. One to kind of keep in mind here is while we're negotiating, there's still going to be time to retool the project based on information that we received during the phase. So as we're having discussions with our potential partners, with our funding sources, again, we've got the opportunity, as you see on our board game here, to go back and revisit either the feasibility phase to retool our numbers, or even go back to the beginning if we need to do so. Where the fun begins. So the planning from all our prior phases begins to pay off. We get to the point of moving forward, or, as I said, retooling. So we're talking about the partners. So we identified who some of those partners may be, and we'll talk about those later this afternoon, phase 1. But it's our development partners and our funding partners. And most of our funding here is going to be Florida Housing Finance and maintaining our relationship and cementing our relationship with them. So we document our partnerships with all of our teams. So it's our architects, our contractors, our service provider, if it's not going to be us, and our property manager. And then also with our funders for each one of the legs of the development stool. So it's also at this point that we begin working with our property manager and our supportive service provider to develop a plan how we're going to operate the building once the doors are open. So at this point, we've assembled our team, negotiated all of our funding for capital, operating, and services, and we've made the decision to go forward. We've got a project that we've determined is physically and financially feasible. So it's time to close on the purchase and begin phase. You may or may not have construction and or renovation here. So we include it. We'll kind of talk about it at a very high level. But if you do this is where some of the bigger dollars start in your acquisition and particularly in your construction. And this is where some of the biggest risks can take place, and you need to make sure that you're prepared for this. There could be cost overruns if you've ever done development before. One thing to keep in mind with these risks is risk is going to be everywhere in this development project, throughout the development cycle, and then through the operation. So risk is everywhere, but there are ways to manage it. So we talk about some of the ways to mitigate the risk here. It's with partners that you selected during the prior phases 1 and 3. It's communication with those partners. So written agreements, regular, ongoing communication. That's all if it's a larger project. Again, maybe not so much with this. Owner's representative who can act as a liaison between you, the contractor, and the architect, and keep the project on budget and on schedule. So, we're ready for business. How are we going to operate our building? In reality, much of this preliminary work has already been done on these steps. So we've worked with our property manager on the tenant selection plan, how we're going to identify and lease the tenants and lease those units. The capital budget, we've built a budget based on what we need, the supplies, and in terms of furniture and what we can afford. From a staffing perspective, we know our partners for property management and or service delivery, what's going to be required. There may be some third parties that we need to bring on to help with the ongoing management. And from the tenant perspective, we talked about the importance of engaging the tenant here. So we developed our property management plan. we've got good orientation on how we're going to bring those tenants on, and coordination between both the property manager and service provider. So we've kind of gone through this at a very high level. We've taken you through the supportive housing development cycle. So now let's take a break and see if we're ready to operate permanent supportive housing. Okay.
Thanks, Steve. And we have had some questions come in, but they're very specific to the RFA itself. And so I just want to remind everybody, and I'll put a note about this in the chat box too, that if you have questions that are specific to the RFA requirements or eligibility, that those should be emailed to Ken Reese, and I've pasted his email address in the box as well. So you could open up an email right now, get one started to him, and start tracking all of the questions that you have there. But what we had is any questions specific to the content that Steve and I are covering. So we are going to keep moving forward. And this is during the session is when you need to get out your pen and piece of paper, and I want you to number it, start numbering it, and what we're going to do is walk you through an assessment to do that. So everybody take a minute to grab a pen and paper and number it 1 through 12, I think is what we're going to do. And while we do that, I'm going to see if Bill or anybody else from Florida Housing wants to make any comments about what's been said so far. Bill?
Thank you, Nicole. I just wanted to make 2 quick comments, unless someone else here, the panelists. We have some Florida Housing senior staff here also to help us. But I wanted to reiterate that with assistance loan and really with all of our fund opportunities, either affordable housing for general populations or permanent rental housing or permanent supportive housing for special needs populations, we do not do what would be considered transitional. We do not fund transitional housing or shelters. Again, kind of as Nicole said, you know, a good set of tenets or rules for permanent, how we consider permanent rent housing would be that the lease is at least 7 long. There's expectations that the resident will be allowed to continue occupancy or residency as long as they meet the lease agreements, and transportation and services and programs aren't a condition of residency. The second thing I wanted just to mention, and Steve did in an excellent presentation, Steve, is that, as Steve said, it was a very good high-level overview. But I wanted just to kind of reiterate what Steve said. Some of the things that were covered, again, you would have to determine how you were doing your project management, who you were going to work with. Again, if you were just acquiring, you know, a couple single-family homes to rent to homeless households, your development plan and your team would look so much different than, say, if you were doing a 30-unit rental project that was new construction. So, you know, take that into consideration based on what your needs are going to be regarding that kind of development process, based on the type you want to do, and also, again, as Steve and Nicole mentioned, the capacity of your organization and the capacity of the team that you put together. Thank you, Nicole.
Perfect. So, like I said, we're going to walk you through just a self-assessment for you to determine if moving forward is the right move for your organization. Some of you may already have decided it is, but it's still a good exercise to do. And so we're going to go through 4 slides. It's going to be slides 63 and then the subsequent slides. So if you're referring back to it, you can make a note about that. And we encourage everybody to answer these questions quickly while we're going through it today. We're just going to take a couple minutes, but then also use these questions to convene a group of stakeholders at your agency to kind of think through some of these what may be sticky at your agency. First, let's look at project fit, whether it fits with your strategic plan, mission, and structure. So think about, is this project consistent with your strategic plan and any other new commitments that you have over the next 2 years? So on your piece of paper, just write a simple yes or no. So consistent with the strategic plan and other new commitments that you might have already coming down for 2 years. Next thing I want you to answer is yes or no. Are the finances and leadership of our organization expected to be fairly stable over the next several years? Finances stable. And again, if you have to answer no to some of these, that doesn't mean that you're not ready. It just has to give you a picture of where you might need to either focus some of your energy. If you answer yes to things, it might make it easier for you. So it's just to help assess sort of how difficult or where you might need technical assistance along the way. So we have an annual audited financial statement, and are those done in timely and professional way? So do annual audited financial statements and timely and professional monthly statements as well as sufficient fund balance, yes or no? And then are the accounting staff prepared to make changes to accommodate real estate development, ownership, or operations? That can be a big one. Simple yes or no. We're going to keep moving forward, and then at the end, I'm going to put up a poll that just says how many of you could answer yes or no to some of these too. So keep track of that. So now let's look at organizational abilities. So do we have staff people with either the interest or the funding or the time or the skills to do the following? So first is directly coordinate with the development process. We have staff that can help directly coordinate the development process. Do we have staff that can oversee a development consultant as a single owner if need be? Have staff that can actively participate in a shared owner structure in which the other owner takes much of the responsibility in development. So some of these might be yeses and some of them might be no's, and it can help you think about how your project should be structured. And do we have a staff person with the ability or interest or funding to serve as the owner's representative to oversee property management and services and provide asset management services once the project is up and running? Moving on, so do we have staff people who can financially support, do this, or can we financially support a new staff person to plan for needed services during the development process? Do we help coordinate the support services? And that can directly provide the supportive services. So again, this is once the project is up and running, do we have staff people that are already in existence that can help do some of these things? Do we have staff that can help support the involvement of residents in the project? And then the piece of the assessment we're going to do is about the board directors. And so for these ones, we're asking, is the board willing to, or can you see your board be willing to do some of these things? So first is to play an increased role. So willing to play an increased role if the proposed form of ownership requires it. It may require them to structure, may require them to do different things. Do you see your board doing that? Board willing to delegate authority for significant business decisions to the executive director or a committee of the board so that we can make timely real estate decisions that don't have to wait for a quarterly meeting. Board delegating some of that authority. Is willing to call special meetings if necessary for real estate decisions in a timely manner. Is the board, or can you see your board being willing to acknowledge and support the additional staff time that is required to undergo this development process? So kind of going back to, do you see any other significant projects on the horizon for the coming years? Are you and your board on the same page in terms of this is a priority and being able and willing to dedicate time to it? Okay, great. So I am going to open a poll, and you should see that pop up on your screen. And we're going to just leave it open for about 5 minutes. So the question on the poll, you'll be able to see over on your chat panel here, how many yeses were you able to list? Were you able to list none, a few, many, almost all, or all? And we're just going to leave this open. I'll share the results with everybody towards the end of today. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Steve. I'm going to use so we can hear you.
No, thank you, Nicole. So Nicole's exercise was really a great segue between what we talked about in terms of the development cycle and capacity, but also getting into our next discussion, which is an overview of the possible players that you may want and need on your development team. So while you may not need all of these, it's good that you're familiar with the various roles in the development cycle. And another thing is individuals, again, these are some smaller projects that we're talking about this particular demonstration. So, but some of the parties may play more than one role, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Some of those may become very evident to you as we continue to work through this. But we divide these players on your team by their attention span to the project. So those with a shorter term of attention or interest in the project are going to be those that take you from the phase of the development cycle through the time your project opens for business. And those with a longer term, which is presumably you as the owner and operator, are take you from the concept phase until presumably or theoretically you would cease operations on the building. So let's focus on a few of these. And again, just when you do reference back slide, let me say I did that, but this slide is slide number 70. So just kind of briefly, the owner, as we said, would likely be you as you're going to be applying for this Florida housing demonstration. The developer is the party that's going to take the blank canvas based on your vision to the finished masterpiece where you're ready to open for business. We talked earlier, too, about the collaboration between the property manager and the service provider. So, and again, this is something that we'll dig deeper in, particularly in the property management piece. And lastly, that's probably because it's most important, it's the tenant. So this is the reason we're actually doing this project. There's a demonstrated need, and we feel that we can address this. So we want to think about how we're going to create the housing, but also market the housing to those individuals. So let's explore some of the roles in greater detail. The owner, this is where the buck stops here. The owner has ultimate accountability. You're responsible for assembling partners to ensure the short-term and the long-term success of the project. So the owner is responsible for the performance of the project, for any payments that are required anywhere throughout the project, and then long-term for the compliance of the project, and we'll talk a bit more about that as well. The owner engages both the property manager, and if it's a separate service provider, although unlikely here, but the property manager and the service provider to develop plans. And again, this gets back to your vision, this gets back to the population and the need that you're trying to fulfill. The owner also engages stakeholders in the development cycle. It's your funders. In this case, it may be solely or largely Florida Housing Finance. Also engages the community, engages the partners and the tenants. So it's responsible for monitoring it. It may hires others to this work, but the owner is ultimately responsible for the financial monitoring, so the profitability, the income and expense management, for the physical building, repairs, replacement, the leasing of the building, and as we mentioned, compliance monitoring. And it's compliance for this particular project. So need to keep in mind, you're in this for the long run as the owner, and this would have an impact on your ability to get funding for future projects from those same funding sources. We will get certainly larger projects, but you may choose to have someone else develop this project, and that's a decision that you're going to have to make during the feasibility and the concept phase. But the developer is going to be the entity, and if this is you're going to oversee the project from its initial concept, pre-development, to development, so to when you actually open the project doors for business. So now if you are hiring a third developer and form as some sort of a joint venture, they may have an ownership in or partial ownership in this project. So, we'll talk a bit more about that. But the developer is also going to be involved in the design of the project. So, working with the rest of the team, including the property manager, because this is going to have an impact on how we manage the project term. They're going to work with the service provider because we need to think about how we're going to deliver those services to our targeted population. And we just, generally the design, we want to make sure that the building is going to suit the needs of all the tenants. So in summary, again, for projects that we're talking about for this demonstration of 10 units, you're likely not going to have a third-party developer. But they can either be in it for the short term, just to help you get the doors open, or it could be for the longer term. We'll be sharing some of the risks and responsibilities with you. So, but if it's your organization, and presumably it will be here, you will have the long-term responsibilities as the developer to get the building ready for operation and then oversee both property management and the delivery of services in your project. When you're hiring a developer, and this really applies to all of your partners, make sure that you know your partners. You're going to be spending a lot of time with all of them. They're going to be an extension of your organization. They're going to represent you when you are not there. So key questions that you want to make sure. This is, again, if you've got a developer that you're working with, but it applies to other partners as well. Make sure you understand their style. How will you work together with them? How will they work with some of your other partners? What experience do they have? Think about this, and this is really, again, as to whether or not you need a developer in this project, is this, do I have gets back to the capacity issue, but it also is a good to ask is, I'm likely to do this type of a project again, and do I want to build up some type of capacity to repeat this? So if you're bringing somebody on to help you with this process, inquire about how they're going to transfer that knowledge to you or members of your organization. Key questions, remember you're in the driver's seat from a communication standpoint. So think about what you want, how you want it. Is it verbal reports, written reports, what to schedule? Again, all this is going to get back to your original blueprint, your vision. So is it clear? Any development partner should be able to understand that. So another option you have, and this may be a little bit more likely for this size project, is to bring on a development consultant. So this is, again, to be a third party who most likely not have any interest in ownership. But what this means, and again, very likely in this case, you're going to have all of the benefits of this particular project, but you're also going to be bearing all of the risks on your own. So again, think about, are you trying to develop capacity to do gifts, or do you want to look to partner with this entity in the future? So let Bill add a quick comment here.
Yes, I wanted to mention, because you were, again, we were talking kind of, this will help folks who are thinking of developing in urban areas and suburban and rural areas. Again, you'll have to base some of your decisions on, again, the size of your property. Even what we find when we talk specifically about rural areas, you may not have an experienced developer in the very kind of technical true term in your area to partner with, and maybe in some cases you may not even have a consultant that has the experience that you need for a particular funding opportunity. Hopefully, as we're trying to do at Florida Housing, expand, the capability, but also have entities who have experience to kind of move into areas where there aren't experienced developers. But again, with that, you may just be working with a general contractor, or you end up maybe your own kind of contractor or project manager, and then you have to look at that if you have resources available, then you really got to kind of be realistic as to, especially when we're talking about the homeless housing assistance loan with up to 10 units, is think about, what capacity you as an applicant, eligible applicant, could develop. Again, could you develop a 10 unit with resources available and your capacity, or do you have to think of maybe developing 4 units instead? So I just kind of wanted to throw that in again because it may be totally different for depending on if you're in an urban area or if you're in a smaller, more rural area. Thank you, Steve.
Great, Phil. Good points. Good for where we're at here. So again, if you are bringing on a development consultant, be sure to distinguish your responsibility. So what is it that you and your organization are going to be responsible for, and what do you need a consultant to do? If you're bringing that consultant on, so some things that you want to talk about, it's for your type of project. So you make sure that they understand the population you're targeting, and also just the familiarity with your funding sources. So again, if you're providing those supportive services, make sure that they understand the funding sources, certainly with Florida Housing Finance. There's also a cost associated with this. I don't want to skip over this, but and this would be in your project budget. So we talked a little bit about pre-development funding, and this may be an organization, again, getting back to how you answer the capacity questions, and you may want to bring that entity or individual on early to help you at the very early stages of this process. It also might be a requirement to obtain financing from some of your funding sources if you don't have that necessary experience. So again, we'll get just some questions here. This is slide 80 that you may want to ask your development consultant. So what type of experience do they have with Florida Housing, number of applications they've submitted. And remember here too, others have done this before. So, ask for referrals. And as we said earlier, discussing the development cycle, ask a lot of questions. There's a lot of people who have gone through this. So ask your peers, other agencies, ask funding sources, ask trusted local leaders. And if not, certainly Bill and the Florida Housing team provide some insight, as well as us here at CSH. And also, always check your references as well for the people that you're bringing onto your team. So, some things to think about too, some additional questions, that not all projects are going to be successful. So, if your partners ran into some trouble, you want them to have a 1% batting average, but the reality is some projects get stalled and just don't get completed. You want to ensure that anyone bringing on your team and a development consultant here is going to be able to focus on your project. So ensure they have the capacity and they're not overcommitted. And then just make sure you understand this is going to be before, what the timing is, and what happens if the project falls. So provider, again, here we're not going to spend a whole lot of time. I'll just highlight a few things over these next few slides. But since it's likely to be your organization, the provider is going to be responsible for the development and delivery of the supportive services plan. And again, getting back to the importance of collaboration, particularly with property management, is coordination with that property manager. And we'll talk a lot about the property manager here as we go through. It's in the interest of time. The coordination between the property manager and you and or your service provider is really most critical to the long-term success of the supportive housing project. So think about how you're going to work together. Again, this gets back to our communication. Think about what the objectives that you have as a service provider and also the objectives that your property manager has. So understanding your partner's priorities is really the best way to make sure that you avoid problems. And both these roles, service provider and property managers, are going to play roles engaging residents to ensure their individual success. But really, if we're not successful with our target population, we're not going to be successful operating the business. So make sure at a early stage that we're on the same page. So I skipped, because we've kind of covered, and you presumably know your target population. And we're going to jump in, and this is slide 86. No, it's slide 86. Property manager. So we talked about the property manager in the development cycle. Their primary responsibility is the physical and financial performance of the building. So they've got some initial responsibilities which are involved in planning, again, avoiding conflict with the service provider. So one that they're engaged in that process and understanding of the design of the building, the operating budget, because they'll live with both of those for the long term. Presumably you'll have this property manager. So get early engagement with the property manager to get buy-in and accountability is key, and it's going to set a foundation for the initial success of the project. And the property manager is going to be the face of your building for prospective tenants. So from an ongoing responsibility, they're, and they're leasing the units, so they're managing the rent-up process, they're collecting rents, they're filling vacancies, they're on the physical side, they're making repairs, but they're responsible for coordinating the operating budget. So the property manager's responsibilities have an impact on the financial success. Keep in mind here the long-term ability of this project to service our target population. So, and just importantly, the property manager, as we said, works closely with the service provider to address any housing retention issues. So it's the important developing that solid property management plan up front with input from both the property manager and you, the service provider. So, tenets of operating good permanent supportive housing involve integration inclusion. So your property manager is going to be involved with the community, so they're engaging the community, and that's the internal community, your tenants, as well as the external community, your surrounding neighbors. We want to ensure that they're going to be a good neighbor, so we have property that is going to last those 30 years plus that we're talking about. So the upfront coordination is very important, but the ongoing coordination is crucial. So you make sure your property manager has the right staff. They need to understand not only your vision, but the target population and how best to serve that. So from a physical perspective, again, their other responsibility is maintaining the building. And we talk about building maintenance. It's great when we open the building up on day one, the initial lease up, but we want to make sure that we're always focused and your property manager is focused on future residents in the property. So we want to make sure we have that good curb appeal. So fiscal management and accounting, we talked about that in the development cycle as well, so that your property manager is going to be involved in annual accounting, so any special reports that are needed for funding, and that's really, again, for all three legs of our stool, capital, operating, and service. You want to think about how you'll know how the building is performing on a regular basis. So think about what reports you want, the frequency, and the method of delivery. And from a tenant engagement, again, this is going to be the face of you and your building with your tenants. So you want to make sure that your property manager ensures that tenants have a voice and satisfied. So remember, you need to have an occupied building to cover expenses of the project, but also to successfully house our target population. So, and we're going to end with a few questions here that you may want to reference, and this is slide 90. When hiring a property manager, again, getting back to the blueprint that you laid with your vision, make sure that they have similar experience with a building that's your size and your population, as well as with your funding sources. And it is a service component here. Make sure that they have done this before, so they understand the population, they understand the nuances of confidentiality, and if not, how will they prepare this. So we've kind of run through here quickly some of them you're likely to have in your development team, hopefully have a better understanding of those roles and reflect on what you would be able to handle yourselves and what you might need to bring on third parties for. So with this, I'll hand it over to my colleague, Nicole.
Great, thanks. So we are now entering the last 5 minutes of today's session. And so there's a couple of things that I want to point out, and I'm going to demo some of the resources that CSH can provide for you. But first I want to share these poll results from you from that question we asked before, which is how many yeses did you list in the self-assessment? And so half of you responded, and I was really happy to see that about 20% of the people that responded said they could answer yeses to almost all of the questions, which means that you are ready to go to be entering this phase and are probably a really good candidate to respond to the RFP. So I was really glad to see that some of you could answer questions with strong yeses. And again, we encourage you to use that same assessment with stakeholders at your agency to make sure that everybody is on the same page. I also want to let people know that there are some really good resources on CSH's website. And I'm going to see if I can share my screen quickly here to just demo some of those materials. So first one is accessible if you go to csh.org/quality, and I already put that link in there, and then you click on Quality Toolkit, and it will bring up a toolkit that walks you through everything. There's an assessment here to determine if support housing or permanent rental housing is right for your agency, so you can click on that. We talk about the different models, how to involve tenants, how to find unit location, what physical design components should we be thinking about. And so the section for all of the things that we've covered today, so project design and administration might be where you focus on now, but then once you're up and running, there's also a lot of resources on property and housing management services, integrating with the community, as well as some project profiles, which you might find helpful. Source that you heard us refer to today, and I put a link to it, is our Not a Solo Act document. And this one I would recommend everybody print right after this webinar and at least page through it. It's chock full of those assessments that we walked through as sample documents that you can copy about MOUs and things like that. So it's a really helpful tool for you to use as you're sort of diving into this process and figuring out what ownership model you should look like and how to build and maintain some of those relationships. With that, I also want to point out that on slide 92, so when you get this slide deck, we've built into the slide deck another exercise or assessment that you should do at your agency, and that is how to figure out who you need to partner with. So it walks you through a series of questions that if you can answer yes, you may not need a partner with an expertise in that area, but if you answer no, then it may be a key that you need to either get someone on your board, hire someone, partner with someone, or seek outside help through your technical assistance for some of those issues. So again, that's going to be on slide 92 when you get the slide deck, which should be hopefully soon after today. And with that, I just want to call out a few of the next steps. So you've seen this already, some of these links, but after today, we're going to send a recording link as well as all of the materials that we've referenced. There's some important dates. Remember, those are tentative dates, but important dates that Bill went through at the beginning. There's also a draft RFA as well as other information available via the housing website here, and I will copy and paste that link into the chat box one more time so that everybody can have it right at their fingertips. And then again, if you have any questions about the RFA itself, email Ken Reese. Any questions that we did not get to today, either because we ran out of time or just needed some more time to process it, Florida Housing Finance Corporation will be responding to those questions individually via email after the fact. So if we didn't get to it, we will still respond. And we'll keep the chat line open if you have any final questions. And if there isn't anything, Bill, did you want to add anything to wrap up? If not, we can let people go.
Just quickly, Nicole, also that we're responding by email, but what we'll also be doing is taking all the questions and comments, and what we'll do is we'll post a Q&A on the site where the RFA is located, so everybody will be able to see the questions and also our responses to those questions. Thank you, and thank you everyone for your participation. Thank you very much, Steve and Nicole. It was a fantastic session today, and contact us if you have any more specific questions or need more specific information.
For that, we will close. Thank you all so much for your attention and participation, and we look forward to other questions that you might have for us. Have a good afternoon.